everyone. Did someone grab the mics in the back? Just wanna make sure those are on.
Yeah. What is it? I turned the switch on.
You turn the switch on, cool,
Yes.
thank you. So we'll call to order the Tuesday, September 13th, Town of Rome Joint Community Development Authority and Plan Commission Subcommittee meeting for 2:30 p.m. We'll do a roll call and we can start with Supervisor Goldman.
Goldman here.
Baker.
Capel.
Schermelhorn.
Also present are zoning administrator Emily Zeddies, myself, town administrator Jamie Gabert, and town attorney Nicholas Flanagan. Would you certify the posting of the meeting?
The agenda for the September 13 joint CDA and Plan Commission Subcommittee meeting was posted at the following locations on September 9th, 2022. Rome Municipal Building at 4:10 p.m., Quick Trip at 4:18 p.m., Nichols and Port Edward State Bank at 4:27 p.m. Is emailed to the Wisconsin Daily Tribune at 2:10 p.m. and emailed to on the website at 4:15 p.m.
Could I have a motion to approve the agenda for today?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. I did not receive any comment cards for today. We don't have any members of the public joining us at the moment. So no action contemplated except possible referral to a future agenda. Information updates, recent correspondence, current events, and announcements. Are there items individuals would like to share?
I have nothing.
I've just been sharing at all the meetings just to say it on a regular basis about brush and timber pickup. If you don't know the dates, we have flyers out in the hallway, but the west side will be the first, and you have to have brush out by the end of the day on the 26th. So please tell your friends and neighbors.
Get that brush off.
So discussion and.
Tell a friend.
Tell a friend. Discussion and possible action on the following items. Number 7, discussion and possible action on review of map number 8, existing land use, and map number 9, future land use.
So
Did we get new maps?
I believe in the packet there was an updated one.
there was for, what do you, updated for,
Where you had made notes from the last meeting.
Is there a packet?
there,
Rural
I
residential.
didn't know we had a packet.
I got an agenda, I don't know.
Yeah, I got an agenda too. And,
you don't have a packet?
I can just get it off the website.
I went to the website.
I know the packet is on the website.
I went to the website when I got the agenda and there was no packet, so I didn't go back.
I looked yesterday evening.
Yeah, I didn't go back after Saturday or Friday.
So this is page,
I'll get it.
hold on. Page,
Oops.
I think it's that future land use map is hard to see. Okay. Do you have that map that we can just make photocopies from?
Yep, I can just,
That has those, cause this isn't printing the way I thought that it would.
just the future.
Yeah.
I'm not sure this will blow up as nicely.
My Emily is making copies. The other map that was, we can make copies of, but I had talked to Jerry Wiesinger, cause Jerry had been involved in the county forest land, working with the county to get that established. And he has a couple different times marked the areas where he felt that would be good for county forest land or would be opportunities for county forest land. And so there were a series of maps that showed the parcels, and I thought that was helpful for us to do an overlay on potentials of what would stay forest and recreation.
This is the one with all the X's on it, right?
The one with the X's on it, and then the parcels that are marked in red were parcels that were previously identified but now have been sold, are now privately owned.
Is this Sand Valley? What is this?
That's Sand Valley. That's Sand Valley.
Is this Sand Valley?
Deer Goose.
Okay. And what's this one?
That's the shooting range.
The what?
That's the shooting range.
Does anyone also need copies of the forest land maps, or are you guys able to see that on your respective devices?
I'm trying to get it to come up and it's taking forever.
Okay. Switch M when she gets back.
Oh, there we go. All right, let's see. I got it.
Is this 13?
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is trap shooters.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's what I had.
So Alpine is through here.
Oh, okay, I see. South of Badge, east of 13.
So at the last meeting, so I was absent for the last meeting, so just to recap a little bit. North of Akron Drive, we're thinking about moving that to outdoor recreation from forestry on the future.
And you're starting just to the east of 9th? Where that, it looks like a number 2.
Mm-hmm.
then all the parcels that you have the little loop on are connected then as a proposed outdoor rec area.
And then the rural residential, kinda just surrounding the entire Lake District area? Or is that just to the north, between the outdoor rec and the yellow residential?
I thought it was everything south of Acton Drive,
Everything's,
adjacent to the Lake District. I thought. I didn't think it was just that little corner. I thought it was the three sections there. Am I correct or am I wrong?
I don't know. Wish we had meeting minutes. I don't remember.
Well, we were looking at trying to consolidate or keep residential areas consolidated as opposed to letting
Yeah, I
them
think
go
we-
helter-skelter.
yeah, my understanding was it all, the entire area between Akron Drive and the start of the residential around the
Right.
lakes.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, block 2, 3, and 4. Are we talking on the north there?
We're talking about rural residential.
Yeah, that rural would, yes, only surround the pieces of Lake District.
Which was
Right.
the intent was to make sure that the density isn't as tight as it is currently
Right,
around the lakes
right.
development.
It would be, so it would be rural residential versus residential.
The piece to dovetail there is where the map is north D, east of 13 for potential county forest land. That map gets pretty tight to the places where we had identified rural residential. If you, understanding they're two separate maps, but if you could overlay them, and think of them as one, there was more identification of,
Oh, the forest, is the black X on that other map, is that what Jerry identified as
yes,
potential
as
forest
potential
land?
forest.
So, yeah, it's almost the entire section.
Yeah.
Except for that little. I guess the question is, how much expansion do you think we're gonna have? Is that little corner gonna be enough? I don't think so. I mean, I'd like to keep it that way, but I don't think that's practical if we're gonna allow the town to grow at all. But by having it rural residential, the density will be, it won't be as compact as the lake districts are.
Well, if the county comes up with a way to buy it, great.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't stop them.
In the
I mean,
absence of that,
The county's gonna say, you buy it and give it to us. That's what's gonna
however that
happen.
shakes out.
They're not gonna come up here and buy a thing.
The county already has a 40-acre county forest
Right.
off of 10th and Apache, then going east. It's that where the driveway would go up to Camelot Boat Launch off of 10th.
All county forest land is in town of Rome. It's Seven Sisters, a segment of Seven Sisters Quarry, Camelot.
And this chunk here,
Yeah, what's the last chunk? There's one more chunk, I thought.
that was the old
I thought there
Bert
was only-
Morris property, right?
No, because Burt Moore's property is owned by the city of Adams.
I thought there was only 2 at this point.
Oh, maybe there is only 2, but they are both, all of Adams County Forest is in town of Rome. And it was all previously owned by Adams County. I don't think the utilizing that block 2, 3, and 4 in forest and recreation, I mean, I think that was also kind of what they were thinking for county forest. Looking for the number, where it says rural residential on the map that Emily just made. Maybe identifying, that I think was somewhat identified as another piece for forest, but I think we're identifying that as rural residential.
Actually, it's not identified as forest. That's the blank, the three sections that are blank, right above Camelot, right above that little upside down L shape. Jerry didn't identify that as forest. He left that as open. But the question I have is, are we going to just do that little upside down L, or are we going to add the other half of, was that section 4? Below Akron Drive, south of Akron Drive. And that Jerry did identify as potential forest.
The piece about whether or not it is enrolled in county forest, us maintaining it, if the town's determination is that we would retain it in forest and recreation, then we would advise if people came, if it was purchased, we would advise you've bought forest and recreation property.
Right.
They'd have the option to go through a rezone.
I was just gonna ask that, what would be the process on our end if they bought forest and recreation and then wanted to build a house?
It'd be like any other thing, right? They come to us and say, well, I wanna build, and you're going to say, here's what is permitted in the zoning district you purchased. They're going to want to rezone. They're going to put an application most likely to the planning commission to do so. If it's not consistent with the comp plan future land use map, then they're going to ask to amend the comp plan as well, and we all know what that process looks like, right? So,
Yeah.
the reality is that, and so I think that this process is to try to look at our future land use map to say, this is where we envision, these kind of developments going.
Yeah.
Because if you just, I would just say, if you just swath that all as forestry, nothing's gonna change going forward. I mean, you're going to have somebody purchasing property around Lake District, maybe wanting to go to R4, going to Emily because they want to build maybe a less dense residential. She's going to say it's forest and outdoor recreation. They're going to say rezone it. We want to rezone it, and it's gonna go back, and you're going to be looking at the future land use map again.
The question I have is, do you have to rezone it? If it's, that's the key. That's the key, is that you do not have to rezone it. You can tell them, sorry, we're not gonna rezone it.
That's correct. So
Because we've
you're
been
just going to
So-
close
saying
the.
yes.
And they need to understand that that's probably gonna be the stance if it's gonna be on the future land use map.
Well,
We have turned down rezones, right? We have said no to rezones. We have always said you have the opportunity to ask,
Sure.
yeah.
and they're probably going to ask. I mean, it's, so it would then come to, governing bodies telling them, no, this is, taking a hard stance at it. Obviously the seats change, right? And so there's different visions, and so as long as you put, and we have minutes that reflect the maybe thought process that goes into, if you're going to just paint that all as forestry, that's fine, but I think that the more you can justify that, then the more it gives future governing bodies that are in those seats some idea, rather than just saying, well, yeah, times change, town develops, and why wouldn't we add a buffer of rural residential outside of the Lake District properties? Not saying that either way is wrong, just saying that the process would look like them wanting to rezone. And I could see that very likely happening, especially in those areas that we're specifically looking at. It's right adjacent to Lake District property. I could see somebody wanting to rezone to more of a rural residential and develop over there.
So recently our process, because we've seen multiple rezone and comp plan change applications, and the default has been yes. I have not seen a no since I've started, and that's why I was wondering how that process would change. Cause if they bought a 40 to say, I wanna build a house here, and then you say no, and then the next person buys 40, don't wanna build a house, and then they say no. That's where I was confused with that process.
So just to provide a little bit of background, that may be the case since you've been here. There have been no's just prior. There have been less no's when it's a single person that buys a property and wants to put something rural residential. The no's more recently have come in when somebody maybe wants to put a denser subdivision, for example, in a location. There's been a bit more scrutiny, I would say, from a rezoning comp plan amendment standpoint for those that want to do subdivision developments, particularly where they don't want to put in roads, or they're just kind of choosing certain locations that lower their cost and get a subdivision. And so there have been no's, mostly surrounding developers looking for subdivision developments. I don't recall many.
I think they were out in that, in the
There were
the
a
part
lot
that
of,
we're saying outdoor rec.
there were a lot of yeses before there started to be no's.
Yeah, I don't recall many that were for individual, purchasers that wanted to build a home.
No,
I
no, I
I'm not
remember,
sure that we have done that
I
often.
remember a couple, one or two subdivisions just before
Subdivisions,
Emily
yes,
got.
absolutely subdivisions we have.
Yeah,
And I would suspect we would continue to do so.
I just have a question. What is the difference between rural residential and residential? Is it lot size? And what would the lot size be for a rural residential compared to residential?
Sure. So rural residential is probably going to be your R4 and R5. That's going to have lot size, I believe R4 is 4 acres? 5. R5 requires a certain lot size before they can even put a home on it, if I recall. And so there's absolutely requirements that rural residential would have to ensure that there's less density. I mean, by rural residential and those requirements, it forces density to be less and be a little bit more preservation of wooded areas, and it would be a good buffer if you, or kind of segue from your really dense areas to your forestry areas.
Okay, so it would have to be at least 4 acres for a rural,
I'm sorry,
5 acres?
yeah, I was incorrect.
Okay, if I'm looking at these parcels here, how many rural residential homes could you possibly fit on there with the water coming through 1, 2, 3 of them? And how they're broken up? Am I looking at the right one?
What?
Or no?
So
Is
what's
this
yellow
over here?
already?
we're looking here.
The yellow
Oh,
is
I'm
the-
sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
outside of that.
Okay.
And then we're talking, this is what Jerry has marked as forested.
Oh, this is that L I thought you were talking about.
This is the L.
Oh,
upside down L.
I see. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking
It's
at
to
the
the
wrong
east
thing.
of-
I'm sorry.
It's to the west, I'm sorry, it's to the west.
Yeah, okay.
But, so, leaving block 2, if we're thinking east to west, going into the third block there, looking at the area where essentially the trap shooters would be. We had identified that as all outdoor rec. Sort of thinking to the south of there, seeing the potential of what may have also been identified as county forest, so north of Alpine, west of State Highway 13. I mean, I think that's maybe focusing some attention to that piece of the map, because you have some commercial in there. What do we potentially see as a mix of residential, commercial, and forestry for that swath of the area? I think
So we're between Alpine and Akron, west of 13?
west of 13, yes.
Correct.
Yeah, you could even go just slightly, if you wanted to go to Anoa, so you were encompassing sort of the piece north of Lake Arrowhead.
Well, we already have R4, R5. I think it's R4. North of Alpine, west of 13. There was a previous subdivision that was okayed for that area, I believe. And there's got to be maybe a half a dozen lots on Alpine. The driveway comes in off of Alpine to the north.
You're saying on Alpine?
Yeah.
So you'd actually have 3 in that area. So your 2 yellow blocks, so behind the red block, which is Rome Town Center, your 2 yellow blocks north and south of Alpine, those are fairly recent.
Mm-hmm.
One was a subdivision, one was actually a CSM. And then way up on the north, right before you're gonna hit town of Saratoga, off of 14th Avenue, where that yellow block is, that was also a subdivision, and we just looked at that one, 11 lots were created there.
Right. So then what you're saying is that little square on the corner of the town center and I don't know what that be 13th Avenue, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yep.
These would be all the lots that were approved earlier, the R4 lots. Just that would be that yellow block.
So to the south, R4, to the north, R1. Those were approved as R1.
Okay.
So R4 is reflected as residential?
Yeah, those would be, that yellow that's R4.
The rectangle looking one.
Yep.
And the one above it you say is R1?
That's R1. Because that one was
This is the R1, this is the
that was a CSM. That was less than 4 lots or it was 4 lots that were created there.
This one they said it's an R4, right?
But so, going back to Sharon's question, rural residential on this map must be R5.
Only.
R5 only. Because R4, we know R4 is that subdivision up at 14th Ave.
That's R4.
So that, and again, that's North Central Planning develops this map for us, so they must group everything except for those R5s as, and an R5 minimum is,
35 acres.
yep, big.
But certainly
But
that can
rural
cause-
residential
that
is
can cause some
R4 plus R5.
that can cause
They're
some
both.
confusion from our zoning
Just
standpoint.
R5.
I think what Bill's asking is,
Okay.
so on that future land use map, it sounds like it's only R5. It can cause some confusion because in our zoning, R4 is called rural residence district,
Yeah.
Ah,
which
ah.
would probably have most people thinking that rural residence is rural residential, but
So take down the question for Dennis. Can he change the map to reflect our R4s and R5s as rural residential?
I think you'd want to, yeah.
I think it would make it much less confusing.
Because R5 is rural estate residence, the fact, I think it would make a lot of sense to have your rural residential be R4 and R5. Because if you just have it as R4 and lower being residential, then it would appear that the comp plan envisions any
No large,
number of densities
yeah.
to be that residential, and I think there should be a kind of a line drawn at that R4, R5, and R3, R2, and R1. Right between
Yeah.
those would make a lot of sense.
I gotta look at these other maps for that. He doesn't have it marked as forest.
As far as commercial development goes, I mean, east and west on Alpine to a degree, and then north on 13, maybe not perhaps all the way to the northern boundary, but there's not a lot of real estate on 13 left, really, if you think about it.
Well, and isn't there, like, they can't have driveways off 13? Isn't that a thing? Not you can't.
They
but-
can, but there's a
Yeah, they
distance that
don't.
DOT will.
Yeah, we don't oversee that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be
Specifically,
us,
that's-
but it'd be difficult for a business to go in and then, cause they wanna regulate the driveways off that.
Dan, could you just repeat that? So you're saying,
I'm just saying, so we've got the gateway overlay, right?
Yep.
Using that as kind of a landmark, and maybe a bit more west as well from where that extends. And then north on 13, there's a bunch of parcels that are theoretically available that if you were gonna have commercial development, I'd think that they'd wanna be on a state highway. How they get access to their property is maybe not so much our problem, but I'm thinking of, we're talking about these storage buildings and stuff like that, and people don't want to see them, but they pop up and they fill up, and all of a sudden there's need for more. I don't think that's going away. I think it'd be a bad idea to say, no, you can't build them anymore in town. But there might be other complementary businesses to everything going on here that want to come in too, right? That aren't necessarily going to want to go in the town center or won't fit at some point. So it'd be nice to just kind of outline where that might be.
so marking gateway overlay where it is forest and recreational now as commercial.
I think it's the properties that abut D, Alpine, and 13, that would make sense.
D, Alpine, and 13.
Didn't, I'm thinking of that parcel that would be on the southeast corner of Highway 13 and Akron Drive. That's a 40 on that corner there.
The southeast corner of,
Kitty corner from where the trap shooters are.
okay,
Didn't that 40 get sold to a guy that was gonna be labeled forest and recreation? I thought there was somebody that came in front of the planning commission that bought that piece.
Are you thinking of the one that wanted, it was between R4 and R5?
I didn't think he was gonna build anything other, that it
okay,
was just
yeah.
gonna be more of a hunting land or something.
I think the one I'm thinking of, if it's the same one that you're thinking of, did want to build. He was buying a large, or trying to rezone a large enough parcel. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be in the future subdivided.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had an agreement entered and recorded on the property. Is that what you're thinking? And
I can't
that was the
remember
difference
totally,
between-
Nick.
That was the difference between R4 and R5, if I recall. What he wanted to do wouldn't support R5, but R4 had smaller lot sizes, and our concern was to put it into R4 would leave it open for a future land division. And he said he assured us that wasn't his intention, and we just cemented that, if you will, with an agreement. If that's the one that you're
That
thinking.
very well could be, but I thought I just remembered that corner 40 or whatever.
Was it somewhat recent?
Oh,
Had to be early in the year, maybe?
it
What
could have
about the
been.
guy that built the house?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been earlier this year. I think that's the one you're thinking of.
It
Mike.
very well could be. But so he would still fall in the rural residential district, so we wouldn't have to do anything as far as the map goes to change anything as a result of him buying that piece of property. As long as it's zoned R4.
He's already gone through rezoning.
Right.
Yeah. So we've already, I think, did we have to adjust the comp plan for that one?
Yeah, we did.
I thought we did, yeah. So we've already amended the comp plan, future land use map, and rezoned that property.
Okay, thank you.
And we did record an agreement on that property.
All right.
Related to the division of that land.
But then does that then take out that parcel along Highway 13 out of the overlay district, gateway district?
I don't
Oh,
think
yeah, that one was not in the,
Yeah.
so are you thinking that one, the one you're thinking of was in the gateway? Because the one that I'm talking about
I think this is what you're
was
thinking.
not
I'm
part of the gateway.
thinking this one right here.
There's something, let me pull it up. It's FR to R5.
I'm pretty sure I know the individual's last name, but I, again, don't want to speculate wrongly that if you're thinking of a different one,
And I thought
being
that was
televised, I really don't wanna say
southeast
somebody's
side
name.
of town.
This has got to be it.
In addition to that piece about gateway and commercial, I
Mhm.
think addressing,
This is over here. You're thinking over here somewhere.
Is this the trap shares?
Yep.
I'm thinking this parcel right there.
addressing that square where
Locked in through
Mike brought up the
the meteor.
development north and south of Alpine, cause that's kind of a interesting square where there's lots happening.
Sorry, whereabouts on Alpine?
Where we have the R1 and R4, north and south, and then there's a little bit of commercial that's in there and some residential that's along there, that subset along Alpine. Do we wanna keep that all forest and recreation? Do we wanna, I mean, obviously we have some that's already residential in there, but do we wanna subset what's left as commercial, maybe up to 15th or maybe all the way to Z? And then how to handle that forest and recreation, like especially between Alpine Drive and Roma Woods? Are we thinking that's all, we wanna keep that forest and recreation, or do we wanna make that rural residential? And there's even a spattering of agricultural in there.
I guess my thought process is we would want commercial development to be closer to the center of town. Center being 13 and D and Alpine. Plus, once you get further down Alpine to the west, I mean, the grade isn't necessarily the greatest for. Plus, you got the school forest there, right?
Yeah,
And then you collide into the other development.
Yeah, and I don't think school forest is noted on this future land use map, because that should be noted as governmental, and I don't see that along Alpine. There's no,
Yeah, it's not there.
yeah,
It would be west of 15th, north of Alpine,
yep.
about halfway in that section.
School forest.
West of 15th, north of Alpine.
Right up in here.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
That's that rural residential that,
Yep.
yep.
Can you click on that just to the right of where you are right now?
Where
That's the one that was.
is
Oh,
that
that is?
big
Yeah.
green
Oh.
building going west
Oh,
on
it's on
Alpine?
This is 13.
Right along where the pipeline goes
This is
through,
13.
there's a big green building.
You're right.
Is that one of, do you think that's one of these commercial buildings?
Pipeline comes through here,
Yeah,
doesn't
I'm
it?
looking right in through here,
It's probably one of those, yep.
cause I know that, that property to the, then it would be the south of that lot, there's agriculture in there, cause the guy's got corn and stuff growing.
I don't know if that's truly agriculture,
Or just something he did on his own to,
food plot. Yeah, here's the pipeline. Okay, so there's this property, driveway for that one comes in behind it. So who's got this big square though? Well, that's further this way.
yeah, that would have to be that red spot, because I know there's a, I'm pretty sure there's a house or something right next to that lot.
This is 14th.
I'm wondering,
This is the house. We're between 14th and 13th, I guess.
It's right here.
just
Okay, looking at the
west of
south
that
side.
block, that's marked R4, the red little dot there.
Oh, that, so,
Isn't that that big
That
green
green-
building?
yeah.
Looks like it's abandoned all the time.
yeah, but it was, I know you're gonna think I'm making this up. They grew worms. That's what, they had a business there, and
Okay.
they grew worms. And now they sold that, so it's not operating as a business anymore. I think it is
But it's still zone commercial?
I believe it is still zone commercial, but it's not, it's not being utilized as that. But I think that they had a worm operation there.
I don't think we're talking about the same building.
The green one right off of Alpine.
This one here maybe?
Well, that one just got built. This one's newer. I know.
Okay, is that that-
I know who owned that.
Is
I
that
also
just that
know-
garage looking
yeah.
thing with maybe an office or something
Yep.
in it?
I also know who owns this building. This residence, I don't know who that is. So,
When we're looking at the future
This was a
land
wood
use
shop.
map, should we be looking at what's currently
This is
there?
probably the property
Because we
I'm
know
thinking about.
commercial
I
is
think that
going to be
Stuff
more
is big.
around
Mhm.
Alpine, which it, where it
Back in
has
here.
been, and then on 13.
Mhm.
Would it make sense to, is if we designated that area as our commercial, regardless of what's there now, like that R4 and R1?
No, you have to keep the R4 and R1 there, cause they're
Okay.
what's there now. That's why I say that those are confusing blocks in there, because they do have some intermixedness
Yeah.
to them. Which is, I do think you could make what Supervisor Goldman is saying, additional commercial in there, but the residential that's there is there.
Yeah, that would remain,
Yeah.
but then we'd
And
fill
your
in.
future land use map is your vision or your plan, right?
Mhm.
So we, again, are amending the future land use map, we're not doing anything with the current zoning. I think that's important for anybody watching.
Right.
And really any further discussions on it is that we are looking at the future land use map, which is our comp plan. That's gonna come into play then when, if there was, so it's not gonna have any impact on the current zoning. If somebody did want to rezone, then you need to look at the comp plan to see if the rezone is consistent with the comp plan. So as you look at what your vision is, and I think Supervisor Goldman had a really good point. So talking just about commercial, your future land use map is very reactive, to say the least, right? I mean, you have commercial where somebody may want to rezone to commercial, but you don't have that, like, the corridors with a vision on where that commercial is going to be. If you want the plan commission to have some footing for saying, no, this is not appropriate commercial because this is where our vision of commercial is. If that's what you want, then setting those commercial areas makes a lot of sense. You can certainly pay mind to where there's some residential scattered in there, but it makes a lot of sense to set some commercial along the areas where you envision commercial development to be in this town. So I think Supervisor Goldman made a really good point, and there would be a lot of reason to look at that area and say that would be appropriate for commercial, it's our vision for commercial, and then designate that on the future land use map in that way.
The challenge, of course, being that there is residential mixed in there already, and those people wouldn't probably be happy with commercial development mixed.
It doesn't really affect them. And,
in the
or
future,
because
it
you're,
very well could.
in the future, you would attract more businesses than residential. Is that why you feel they might
Well,
not
again,
like it?
again, so now let's just say it's zoned, I think
Commercial.
I can see what Supervisor Goldman's saying, so let's just say it's zoned residential, whatever, R1. And your future land use map, you designate these large areas as commercial. And somebody comes along and purchases a property immediately adjacent to a residential, and it's maybe currently zoned R1, but they say, I wanna rezone to commercial. Well, the process is, of course, the application to rezone. The Plan Commission's process is to look at the future land use map, and if the future land use map shows that it is the vision of the town, the plan of the town to have commercial there, it probably would be appropriate to rezone that to commercial. So is that what you're saying, is really paying mind to where those residentials are in kind of somewhat the same way that we did with that, back to that little L shape by the Lake District properties, to create that buffer, a little bit of buffer between those residential areas where they are residential really now, and where you put commercial. So there has to be a little artfulness, I think, to how you draw that, because the plan is important when somebody would come and say, I want to rezone that because I want to put a commercial development in there, to kind of provide that buffer for the current residential areas that might exist there.
As best you can. I mean, I think we've all seen it before elsewhere where there's some older homes that have been there forever and then they end up getting gobbled up and now
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a strip mall or something like
Yes,
that, right?
absolutely.
Progress is inevitable.
Just don't make anything big enough for a Walmart.
So, remember these are filmed.
No.
So, just because it's 3:20, and I know we also wanna talk about the next agenda item, just so we keep that one, our conversation on that moving. Emily's got good notes, she's gonna touch base with Dennis, because I think it would be helpful whether he can send us the map or whether he can do the map to see these changes as a draft one on the map. So Emily will work with Dennis to get a draft map that reflects these conversations, so you can see how that adjusts the colors of the map, the layout of the map.
Is there really anything south of Apache that is of concern to anybody? I mean, a lot of that's unbuildable realistically, in the southeast anyway. And to the west, Sand Valley owns a good chunk of that, right? Outside of what's shown there?
Yes, it is not, I don't believe it has been all put into the PUD yet, but I believe they purchased all of it now, yes.
We
But the piece that's, to the southeast, that is, you know, really marked that government public right now, I mean, that land is for sale, and if it is purchased, I mean, I think we need to have a strong vision if that's something that we do wanna stay forest and recreation, or, not be developed, that a strong vision on that.
Fair enough.
And it couldn't just be maintaining it on the map that way, but, I mean,
Some of this is right in here.
All this here.
Oh,
okay. With that,
He's talking about.
just so we can make sure that we get it in, we'll go to item number 8, discussion of possible action, referral of a recommended zoning code amendment to plan commission. Letter A is discussion and possible referral to a future agenda, review potential draft language for zoning district requirements regarding canopies.
Would you like me to take it?
Yes.
Okay, so I would just clarify that, so we don't have, you don't have draft language at this point. What we're doing is reviewing, really some options that may exist for regulating, and how we treat canopies, carports, gazebos, pergolas, et cetera, in certain districts in the township. At your last meeting, we had, reviewed the definitions that I had put together, as well as Emily had put together a very good visual example, along with maybe some starting points for consideration of how we treat those specific items. During our conversation and review of definitions and those photographs and how we might treat those, it was requested at the last meeting that I provide you some of the local area regulations. What I did was I just went north. But certainly if you would like other regulations, just let me know. I can add to it. We'll call this a developing document. But the second page of well, it'd be the third page, but one is double-sided. The third page, which at the top says other local ordinance treatment of canopies, carports, gazebos, has what I reviewed as the regulations from the towns of Saratoga and Grand Rapids, and then the city of Wisconsin Rapids. And so, if it's all right with you, maybe a good starting point would be for me to just give you an overview of how those ordinances treat these. Then you can either provide me some direction as far as wanting to see other ordinances, or we can have a conversation about how we might want to treat these. All right, so starting on that summary that I provided, starting with town of Saratoga. I would say both for the towns of Saratoga, Grand Rapids, and somewhat for the city of Wisconsin Rapids, one interesting point is that there really isn't a formal definition in those ordinances for canopies, carports, gazebos, and pergolas. Okay, so interesting, right? Because we went through this meeting last time, this idea that the clearer we are with definitions, the easier it is to understand. And you'll see that really in a lot of ordinances, they're not defining it either. It definitely helps to define them, but I think this shows you that really, in large part, none of those ordinances do define that, with a small exception with the city of Wisconsin Rapids that I'll review in a moment. I would note that the town of Saratoga and town of Grand Rapids does have a definition for temporary structure. I say that and point that out and also include that in the summary because I think as you, to kind of reconcile that with things that you've seen before, as the zoning administrator had provided photographs and maybe a starting point for consideration, there were some recommendations that that document provided that were more temporary in nature, right? And so I included that definition from each of those ordinances, and you'll see that they're identical. So then, how would town of Saratoga treat these? Well, they first would approach that as an accessory structure or building. They do set certain limitation for accessory buildings and structures. For example, they set a size limitation for all accessory buildings. They don't set, I didn't see a number limitation in Saratoga. They require a zoning permit, specifically where new buildings are erected, added to, or altered. It really wasn't clear though if they would consider things like canopies, gazebos, pergolas as new buildings. It didn't really read that way. Carports, some of them, as we reviewed at the last meeting, there's a couple different options for how, what a carport is. And I would say some of those would, under Saratoga, require that zoning permit and likely a building permit. So I would say out of the three, probably the most lax is probably Saratoga, just from my review. Town of Grand Rapids, the only reason I say they're maybe a little bit more stringent is because in large part, it is very similar to Saratoga, except in any of these situations, I believe that would require a zoning permit from the zoning administrator. There is a restriction on accessory structures established prior to the principal use. I say that because, again, bringing that back to the picture document and regulations, there were some questions. They weren't recommendations, they were more just questions on some of these structures and whether we wanted to allow those on vacant lots. So I include that piece from Grand Rapids because it was a question mark. I would also note that some residential districts, in fact, most all of them, because the town of Grand Rapids is reviewing their zoning ordinance specific to those residential districts and beyond. The residential districts specifically, though, they are setting caps to the number of accessory structures where there weren't. So there are caps on accessory structures for residential districts. And just another note that in R3, they do have mention of allowing a carport. The definitions, again, remember there were a couple different ways of looking at carports. One was as a land use, and it was like that structure up in the upper left-hand corner. That's the kind of carport that they're referencing in Grand Rapids for R3 multiple family. And they have regulations around it. It needs to be incident to the multiple family or rooming boarding house, height and setbacks, minimum square footage for each vehicle space. So there are some regulations related to the carport in R3 where you're talking about that. It's referencing that upper left-hand corner picture on your summary document from Emily. Then the city of Wisconsin Rapids. So they have a bit more complex, I would say, zoning ordinance. They do have a definition for canopy, but I would just caution that that definition for canopy is really not what we're talking about here. It's more from the commercial reference, and I did include it, what their definition is. So their definition is a permanent roof-like feature above a driveway or sidewalk to provide protection from the elements. So kind of like a canopy over the sidewalks and on a main street is kind of how I read that. They also would consider carports, canopies, gazebos as accessory buildings. They would require a zoning permit and also a building permit in some cases. Again, I say in some cases because I keep pointing to it because it's a great example of a situation where a building permit would be required as well. It'd be that upper left-hand corner carport. Now, specific limitations though for residential districts, what the city of Wisconsin Rapids goes further with is they have a section where you're looking at what is permitted in residential districts of what they call residential accessory buildings. So gazebos and pergolas would be what they call residential accessory buildings. They do have supplemental standards for exterior materials, roof lines, and so on and so forth, but that's where the floor area is more than 192 square feet. Where it is going to be that or larger, it needs to be substantially the same to the principal building. It does set number and lot coverage limitations by a specific district. So for example, I pulled out the R1 there. They would not allow more than 2 detached accessory buildings in R1. You see it's underlined. They do not allow soft-sided structures and canopies in residential districts. Not allowed. That is definitely stricter than Town of Grand Rapids, I can tell you that. And absolutely stricter than Town of Saratoga. And then just a note that they do have specific prohibiting of carports. And so to reconcile again, they wouldn't allow these carports, the upper left-hand corner carports, in certain developments. They have that specifically prohibited in their ordinance. But where you're looking at other carports, so for example, the next one down underneath that more structure-like or more permanent structure, land use one I call it, that one has, that one would be prohibited. It just wouldn't be allowed in the city of Wisconsin Rapids in residential districts. Soft-sided structure.
So does this mean in Rapids, you can't pitch a tent in your backyard? Because that's a soft-sided structure.
Yeah, I think they would probably consider that more of a temporary structure, so I think the distinguishment there would be how,
Whether or not it's permanent.
yeah, how permanent that gets erected and remains.
I guess
You know,
that,
if it was a family that had their children camping for the weekend, I highly doubt the city of Wisconsin Rapids is going to drop the hammer with their ordinance. If it was a permanent tent, they would have plenty of teeth to say that that's not allowed in our residential district.
I still have a issue with I think we're being overly restrictive on these,
Yeah,
the
can
ones
I,
that are down at the bottom half of that page that
Can
we've
I-
been on.
Can I puke out my thoughts here and
Yeah.
everybody try to stick with me? And then we'll
Go
go
ahead.
from there. So, I'm thinking prohibit carports that are freestanding. Meaning, I don't have the pictures in front of me, but you guys know what I mean, right?
Yep, because they blow away.
Yep.
For one reason.
Say again.
And I'm doing this based off the definitions that everybody here was so gracious to put time into putting together. Screen tents and picnic canopies, I think those should be permitted, but with a time limit on them in a general ordinance, meaning they couldn't be there for months on end. I think we should allow gazebos and pergolas, but have a maintenance provision in an ordinance, one per property, and potentially a size limitation. And I wouldn't be in favor of requiring a permit for those.
Of not requiring permits?
Only because they're so commercially available. If everybody rushed in here to get a permit tomorrow, that's all Emily would be doing. I mean, people are getting these all over the place. And I don't think the commercially available ones, per our definitions that we've come up with here, are ugly by any means.
Supervisor Goldman, can you just restate again, so allow gazebos and pergolas, did you said, can you just restate what you had said the second? It was to still add some,
To develop some sort of ordinance that would require the maintenance there, or that they be maintained, some sort of language to that effect. A limit of one per property, and we can debate if it's one or more, depending on different zoning areas. And then potentially a size limitation, which one could argue, well, how do you manage that without having a permit? I was just throwing
That's
that out as a
exactly what I
thought.
was gonna bring up.
That's why I was just saying, let me puke out my
That's
thoughts.
exactly what I was gonna bring up. I think,
We get a zoning
I
permit.
don't have any problem with what you're saying except the permit issue.
'Cause
I
that's
think
what we
you have to
approve
have a
permits.
permit process to make sure that they're abiding by the restrictions that are in the ordinance or in the code.
Zoning.
Because if you don't, you have, all of a sudden it's up and it's too late. And you can't do anything about it.
I guess I don't wanna get to the point where we're drilling down and saying, here's the exact 300 square foot window on your property in which you can place your gazebo.
We still would have setbacks though.
Yes,
Yeah,
Which
it
is
they
would
have to
be-
meet, the standards that are in the code. And that, the only way you can assure that is if you're
Code
gonna have a
doesn't apply
permit,
to these.
Well, they would need a zoning permit.
regardless.
I mean, temporary, no, but anything permanent, you need a zoning permit.
Which
So
a
I feel
gazebo is a
upset.
permanent structure, I'm assuming. It's not a
I don't
temporary
think they're
structure.
permanent structures.
Any of these would be permanent structure that need a zoning permit, which is why they're all
But when you say zoning permit, it's only for the purposes of complying with whatever ordinances we come up with.
It would be.
If we're going down the path of complying with building code, none of those are gonna
Nope, and
comply
then
with
what-
that
No, so zoning code would be checking setbacks and assuring there's one per property.
at the time of installation.
So that would be, you're ensuring setbacks on one per
So there wouldn't be a permit because you already have fall under the zoning code.
be no building permit, very similar to our
Okay.
150 square foot or
Then I
less
don't have a
sheds.
problem with it. There's some assurance there, that's all I wanna be.
But would also allow if there was something that was in disrepair that got put up or was left up without a permit, the ability for the town to say you would need to remove it.
Right, that would be a catch point, which would be helpful, I think, to be able to catch that and say, you know, there's a limitation of numbers perhaps, or this one is in such disrepair that we would require the removal before we would issue the permit.
I just don't want us to have a 10-page ordinance over this.
Can I ask just a couple follow-up questions to Supervisor Goldman? So one question I have is, so I have your notes, I think I understand everything you're saying and have that reflected in my notes as a starting point. One thing that I would have then a question on is, are you also saying that you like the idea of including definitions?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
This will undoubtedly require education to the public to understand when
Yeah, well, and really, anytime you have an ordinance, people do tend to navigate to either us or to the ordinance, or probably both, with us first. And they'll ask, you know, what does this mean, or does this apply to me? Definitions are always a lot easier to point them to and say, yes, it does, because.
look at your examples you gave us right here. I mean, they don't really have clear definitions as to
I know
what they're
this.
talking about.
I wanted to make sure I was very clear in my summary that, you know, it's not like we have a deficient ordinance because we don't have definitions. A lot of ordinances don't. That doesn't mean that's a good idea. And I can just give an example of, like, the town of Grand Rapids. I said they're going through their zoning code right now from district standpoints, and adding a fair number of definitions. We're doing it in Grand Rapids too, because having the same conversations, you know, does that mean, you know, does this without a definition mean that, right? And so we need to be clear with our definitions, and I think, I think we can develop then definitions. I wanted to know if that was your recommendation, because then so depending on where this goes, if I were to draft some potential language now for your consideration and maybe then building and kind of shaping at your next meeting, I will put then some definitions, and we'll call it placeholders because there's some options here, right? We can then adjust the definitions as we would like. We can also then work the language for those. So my question to the larger subcommittee is, from the thoughts that were shared by Supervisor Goldman, would that be a fair starting point for our next meeting? Just so you'll see that in taking shape in an ordinance. So then we can have a conversation starting with that and maybe tweak the ordinance language. Cause I can take the thoughts that were shared, put that into an ordinance, and then for this item next time, we can review that ordinance, adjust the definitions, adjust the regulations, and start to see that ordinance start to take some shape, if that would be okay. Is everyone okay with a
Yeah.
starting point being what was shared by Supervisor Goldman?
Sure.
Thank you.
Can we, for gazebo, can we do gazebo / pergola for the definition? Could we group the two together?
You can figure out a way to do that logically, yes.
Both of them aren't enclosed, though. You can have a gazebo that is not enclosed. And if there's a difference, according to City of Wisconsin Rapids, they consider a gazebo a residential accessory building, but what if it's not enclosed? And what if somebody puts up a gazebo that's not enclosed and uses it as a carport?
A gazebo that would be used as a carport?
but we wouldn't allow it to be used as a.
No, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
not all gazebos are enclosed,
Yep,
I mean, people have built gazebos and put chairs underneath them to sit out in the rain and that, they don't necessarily have to be enclosed. So then you're gonna have to get very specific on what type of gazebo.
And I think we would say open air structure for gazebo, cause if you enclosed it, you built a structure.
It could be open air, it could be screened, but if you totally enclose it, I'd feel like it's a shed.
Right, you said
Yeah.
shed.
Yeah. Yeah. And just square footage is so the two additional thoughts, one is square footage for that gazebo or pergola, cause a shed would be 150, and what happens if we don't have a primary residence
I know.
Car underneath
on
it.
the property? Can we have a shed and a pergola or gazebo, or are we, without a primary residence? No. You can have a temporary structure that has a time limit, but you couldn't have a pergola or a gazebo.
As long as you got that maintenance requirement in there, I'm fine with both.
Then going back to the temporary or allowed with time limit, the more screen canopies. Looking at that time limit and looking at our campers in town, can they have a canopy while they're here camping? Do they need to
Well,
take it down where they're leaving? Or are
so-
they here all summer?
So for the screen tents and picnic canopies, which I think was the last example on your images, is like the Walmart special, right?
Yes.
You know, if it's something like 7 days,
She had 15 as a starting point for.
you're not necessarily gonna know if it's there for
Well,
16 days, but if it's there all summer and it's falling apart, then obviously we've got a problem.
I'm talking about putting a pop-up in my backyard. And
having
I
it
don't
all
think I
summer.
should have to get a permit for that. If it's
No.
a screen,
Oh, no,
Not
no.
required.
No, it wouldn't be
No.
permitted.
No.
Temporary would not be permitted.
as long as it's temporary, but there's a 20-day limit
But yeah, so.
under the current language. So this is my issue. I'm going back to the original definition in our zoning code
I agree.
that I looked at. And I think we're overly restrictive on that, just on that last definition. The tents and the pop-up type
So,
things.
so maybe we need to tweak the language on that.
Yeah, well, that's my
There's a
issue.
difference between a camping tent and a screen tent / picnic canopy in my mind, and maybe there's yet another definition that needs to be developed.
I don't know, but getting back to your question about the campers, I mean, they're gonna put up an awning for they're gonna put up a canopy for the whole summer. They're not gonna take it up and down on a 20-day basis.
Well, if it's a El Cheapy one, then I think they will, because it's not gonna survive the summer.
Oh,
I would say they won't be taking it down based on people I've talked to that are
Yeah,
camping. That
I mean,
is up.
and the ones I've seen.
Well,
Yeah.
what's that though? That's not what I'm talking about.
What you referred to as Walmart special.
No, not those. The top ones, not everything on that page.
Like the screen.
I wouldn't take
the
so that's where we gotta, this
doesn't
maybe,
Very temporary.
this maybe needs to be
Soft
said
top.
something like collapsible framing, blah, blah, blah. Half of those don't have collapsible framing, half of those I would say is a canopy or a
They're structures.
gazebo structure that,
They're
I know
structures.
people with homes that leave those up year round and they're fine, so maybe there's an opportunity to tweak that a little
Yeah.
bit, I don't know. But again, having some provisions for the maintenance of these items, if they have one that's solid metal framing and perhaps it has a fabric top, if the fabric top is in disrepair, it's a nuisance property issue that needs to be dealt with.
I don't have a problem with that. I totally agree.
Other question we need to ask Dustin from the county is if you're in shoreline zoning, and you don't have that primary residence, for the county, you can only have less than 150 square foot shed. How do they view canopies for those that would have to have both county approval if they didn't have that primary residence and town approval?
Yeah, that gets to one of my questions. So my questions were going to be, give me a number of days for the temporary, so I can at least get some language for you.
Can it
20?
coincide with removal of the the trailers?
Well, you don't want, I don't think you'll want, and again, I'm talking about the really cheap with the collapsible
I know
legs
what
and
you,
everything. You don't really want that up all year round.
No, but I mean, once.
Or even all
A lot of
summer.
them are used by people that own trailers and that. Can it be that they have to be down when the trailers have to be removed from the lakes and the other sites in the town of Rome?
Are you still talking about,
canopies.
Canopies.
well,
Canopy or awning.
we gotta start using our definitions here.
Well, and it's gonna be easier perhaps when we have some definitions, although, again, there's a number of options for definitions, so I'm gonna take a little bit of liberties with kind of meshing that with our discussion.
Why don't you do
And,
that?
and doing a starting point,
Yeah.
and then let's review the definitions, maybe that's a better way of doing it.
I think that's,
Let me work on the definitions and get you some starting points for definitions, and maybe, I will also put together a starting point for the language, but let's focus on the definitions so we can have definitions ironed out, then we can start having conversations about what we want to
Longer
allow
duration
based
and-
off of those
yeah.
definitions. Because I feel like some of this it's circular, because
We're 5
we're not
months into
talking
it,
about
we're
the
going
same
in
thing,
circles.
because we're not defining it the same way right now. And so we're getting here, and then we're going right back to the beginning, so I will put together definitions. I will probably put together some language, based off of the comments as a starting point. For the next meeting, let's plan on reviewing the definitions, getting that part ironed, and maybe a start to review of the, standards.
And let's switch it on the agenda, so we talk about that piece first.
Yeah, canopies first.
Canopies first.
All right, thank you for the discussion and review here.
Okay.
And there will be 3 sets of minutes on next agenda.
The next, yeah,
So, yep, so, next meeting is October 11th at 2:30. So second Tuesday, and next agenda items, the agenda will look the same, except 3 sets of minutes and flip of items 7 and 8. Okay, anything else? Okay, then I will call the meeting adjourned at 3:47 PM. Thank you.